Go ahead.
So, are you opening us up with the meeting and everything?
Yeah, it's some sort of, do you see the video breakup on his? It's like he got a bandwidth issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let me take my video off and.
But we can hear you, so that's the most important thing.
Okay. Sometimes if there's too many videos, and Derrick, are you on campus?
I'm actually at my job.
Okay, gotcha.
I booked one of the boardrooms.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, maybe, it could be. I feel like it looks better now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it was on my
Since
end.
it's the two of us, Doctor, how do you pronounce your last name?
Statty.
Daddy. Okay. And it's just the two of us today. Dr. Volks looked this over. He's fine with it. So we basically just go through your presentation, and we'll have some questions afterwards, which be nothing like interrogation. It's just more of a question mark type thing to clarify, and also to prepare you for any holes that somebody might try to poke in your research. So anytime you're ready, just go ahead and proceed.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank the both of you for taking time to join me today. This has been a very arduous journey, to say the least. So what I want to do first is introduce the topic or reintroduce the topic. So I did a phenomenological study on the African American nuclear family, whereby I investigated the healthy habits of successful long-term Black couples. Um, my research, let me just go through right here really quickly. So the first thing I want to do is give you just a little bit of background. Um, so what sparked this topic for me was basically when I was working on my master's program, I took marriage counseling because I was doing a Master of Divinity in Pastoral Counseling. And I started noticing little nuances in marriage. And it started making me question, well, why is the divorce rate so high? What are couples doing? Like you'd see these couples in churches and they've been married for 30, 40, 50 years. And I'm like, what are you all doing that's different? So I started asking questions. And during that time, I was in grad school and I began focusing on the issue of making marriage work. And I stopped looking at the divorce rate. And that kind of gave rise to this whole topic. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to look at the problem statement, and then I'll give you the purpose of the study. We'll talk about the significance. I'm only going to do a brief overview of my literature review. That was primarily covered in the proposal and everything. The methodology is where I really wanted to get into, and I had some notes on that. But as we see, technology is not working for us, so we will shoot from the hip, so to speak. And then I want to introduce you to my participants and really give you just a little bit of their history. And then we'll talk about the findings and the results, and we will wrap it up with implications and recommendations.
Sounds good.
So, as stated, the problem that I was attempting to uncover is I wanted to understand why marriage has steadily declined in the African American community. All of the research that I read pointed to anywhere from 42 to 47% of married couples in the African American community ending in divorce. And that problem, as I stated, kind of sparked me wanting to know there has to be more couples. If only 47% are ending in divorce, then 53% of them are doing something right. So I sought out to find those 53. In the process, investigating this particular problem. So the purpose of this study, again, was to understand what contributed to the success of long-term marriages. in the African American community. And I will say that it was an eye opener. Some of the things that I uncovered while doing this study, I was thoroughly shocked by, and others not so much. So, the significance of this study, as you can see here, I have it set. This study will provide researchers and therapists with a deeper understanding of the inner workings of marriage. By that, I simply hoped to be able to help researchers look at marriage from a different scope. Instead of looking at the declining numbers, let's focus on the numbers that are actually still married after the 20-year mark. Um, then I hoped to assist with the creation of new models and possible counseling theories, maybe using some real life approaches to counseling versus just giving us what John Gottman said and things of that nature. How about we interview couples and use that information to create these new counseling models? Um, and in doing that, it will allow therapists and pastors alike to better interact with their clients and members. I noticed that most pastors, though they offer a counseling service per se, most pastors don't know what they're doing when it comes to counseling because they don't have, academic training or on the job training as it relates to counseling. So we just kind of wing it. We go with what we can find on the internet, or we go with what other people say they do. And I really wanted to give them a foundation to go on. So, as I stated, just a brief overview. It was very interesting to me to note that most of the married couples have declined in the African American community. So, when I looked at, as you can see, Muzan, they stated that there was a 29% decline. And I found that very interesting because I wanted to know where those numbers came from. You could not have, you know, surveyed 100% of the African American couples in the country to get that number. So that number was kind of astounding to me, and I really wanted to trace down the number and find the antithesis, if I can use that term, of that number. Where are they coming from? How are you getting this number? And what are these other couples doing? There were empirical studies. I probably read over 150 empirical studies showing the emotional bond that develops between a husband and a wife. And they are very similar to how children bond with their parents. And it's a constant bonding period. And I noticed in the literature where if a spouse would leave, the other spouse would begin to get insecure, or they wouldn't feel free to be themselves, much like a child when we're going through the attachment theory spectrum, which is why one of the constructs of this study was attachment theory. I found a gap here in the literature, where they were not really looking at healthy, successful marriages. All the other studies focused on were those couples who were getting divorced. I may have come across 20 studies while doing this dissertation that actually focused on those couples who were staying married. And I found it very shocking. So using that particular gap, I decided to try and drill down my niche and figure out how I can help just a little bit. So the theoretical framework that I used for this was family systems theory. This was done by Dr. Bowen. He basically broke the family down into an interconnected set of subsystems whereby everyone in the family, though they are independent, they are codependent upon each other. And it was very interesting to note during the study that it actually showed up where if one member of the family acted a certain way, it would actually affect the behavioral patterns of all of the other family members. And this family systems theory actually functions with 8 different sections of this theory, and we'll get into a little bit more of that a little bit down in the presentation. So I have 5 research questions that I was attempting to answer. I have a bar in my way, so I can't really see the 5th question, but the first question I wanted to attempt to answer was, what is it like to be Black and succeed in marriage? I also wanted to know what factors did these couples believe were contributing to the decline and the failure of marriage in African American communities. The third question was, what role did having a healthy married couple play in the success of marriage, someone that they could model after, and how would that help or hurt a marriage? I also wanted to know, how did the socioeconomic status factor into their decision to marry their current mate? And lastly, I wanted to know, how important religion was to the success or failure of marriage. So this study, we're going to talk about the methodology. This study was qualitative in nature. I chose to use Moustakis, his transcendental phenomenological approach. For the study, I ended up using 9 participant couples. I used a proportive sampling with this study. And again, the criteria was that they had to be African American heterosexual couples, and they had to be married for a minimum of 20 years. As you can see here on the slide, I have the diagram of Moustakis' epoche method, whereby it allows the researcher to bracket his or herself out and look at the results and the data from a very objective standpoint, including the horizontalization process. And it was a very interesting process, learning how to break all of these statements and things down. And from these, you will get the composite textural and the composite structural descriptions of each. So let's talk about the participants. As you can see, the age ranges for my husbands were from 51 to 77 years of age. The wives ranged from 49 to 76. They were all African American, and I had educational levels as high as a PhD. And they have been married in a range of between 24 to 56 years. The years of marriage, that range, very, very, how can I say this? That range was very interesting to denote how the couples handled their marital problems. You would see things along the lines of the youngest married couple, they want to fight. They want to deal with things right then and there. When I use the term fight, meaning let's put it on the table. It's happened. Let's go ahead and deal with it. Where then you'll find the older married couples who, like this couple who've been married for 56 years, they may table it for a week at the least. And then they'll come back because they've learned through the course of their marriage, how to navigate that. So I found it very interesting when I was comparing and contrasting the way they dealt with problems in their marriage. So before I get into this piece, I want to go back just a tad to the epoche method. So in order to get these findings, I had to really drill down on the significant statements. You heard me mention composite textural and composite structural. The textural and the structural provided the what and the how, meaning what the couples experienced, how the couples experienced it, and basically what they did about it. And it allows me to get an entire picture of the marriage and how they handled themselves in this marriage. For instance, it would allow me to take one of their significant statements and drill it down a little bit further to pull out what I could get for answering my research questions. Like, for instance, as you can see, research question number 1, what's it like to be Black and succeed in marriage? I found when I was dealing with these couples, that was one of the hardest questions for them to answer. The reason being because no one had ever asked them that question before. No one asked them, why is your marriage so successful? And how does that feel knowing that you're Black and you have societal odds stacked against your marriage and you are looking at statistics saying your marriage is failing, but you are not failing? How does that make you feel? And I noticed when I was talking to some of them, I had one couple who stated, I believe they've been married like 47 years or so. She stated, it doesn't matter to me. I don't think race um, should matter when it comes to the success of my marriage. And I said, well, that's interesting. All of the other couples agreed that it made them feel this sort of sense of pride and accomplishment, and that they could be role models for younger married couples and they could possibly mentor them to get to where they are. Um, when looking at research questions number two, what I found that really stuck out was that when I asked the couples what they felt was causing the decline in marriage, almost unanimously, everyone said selfishness. And one of the couples really broke it down and he said it all traces back to someone being selfish. The lack of the ability to move yourself out of the way so that your marriage can be successful and your spouse can be successful really hurts a marriage. But from selfishness, lack of commitment showed up because, as stated by one of the couples, if you're only thinking about yourself, you're not committed to anything else. And I found that to be a very profound statement and something that I already kind of knew. The outside influences, most of those stemmed from family input. And some of those stem from friends. And I had couples who, one in particular, who would state, I don't bring people around my family. To which that, asked me, made me probe him a little further. He said, because you don't know who you can trust, even though they claim to be a friend. And they can come to your home around your family and they can put your family they can make them uneasy. So if I have visitors, I have them sit on the porch and I meet them outside. And I found that very interesting. So that showed me the protective nature of the husband as it comes to, his family. Um, and then finally, you see, there was a lack of communication. That lack of communication stemmed from someone being selfish and not wanting to talk things through. They didn't want to go through and figure out how we can solve this issue. What about this is really causing us the rift? Um, Research question number three. What I found here was that all of the couples said that it was invaluable to a marriage. However, they also stated that it's only helpful if the couple you're modeling is honest about their behavior. What they meant by that was what you are presenting on the outside, you have to be living when you're home and no one is around. And I kind of drilled down on that with another couple and I said, okay, can you expound? And she said, her words were, you can't be fake phony. And I kind of chuckled and because I was like, fake phony. Okay. I probably wouldn't have put that together, but I said, okay, can you explain? And she said, if you're not holding hands in public, you're not holding hands at home. But when you get in public, everyone can tell that the relationship is not genuine because your smile looks like it hurts. And from that, I was able to deduce that a lot of couples, since they don't know how to mitigate or navigate through their problems, they are probably putting on airs in public and they are, in a sense, faking it until they make it. They are trying to give us this persona of the Huxtables, if I can use that term, when they're really fighting at home and they don't really know how to get help. And that also spurred me to say, okay, this is why we need this kind of a study so that we can maybe help these couples navigate with these problems. And they said that if you have a couple to model, when you're going through those issues, you have the opportunity to reach out and talk to them and say, hey, how did this happen? What did you do? How did you help it? And though everything that you are doing will not work in my home, some of it can possibly help. In research question number 4, this question really astounded me because all of my couples but one stated that socioeconomic status did not factor into their decision to marry. And all of them built what they now have together. So when they got together, it wasn't based off of their socioeconomic status. And that is a direct conflict with what we see happening in society right now with the advent of reality television. And I call it the Hollywood view of marriage, where everyone has to, we're taught, you grow up, you go to school, you get a good job, you marry someone, you get the White House with the picket fence and 2.5 kids, and you live the American dream. And all of these couples literally stated, with the exception of one, literally stated that socioeconomic status was not a factor. So what I was able to deduce from that was it gave them the ability and the opportunity to build together. What they now have, they built, and they probably appreciate it a lot more. The couple who did place the emphasis on socioeconomic status, it wasn't a determining factor, but it was a helpful factor, if that makes sense. She basically stated that she knew he was stable, and coming from a stable family, that meant a lot to her because they met. He was already done with grad school. She was in grad school. He had internships, and she knew his career was going somewhere, and she wanted her career to go somewhere as well. So she viewed him as a role model, so to speak, as her husband. And I found that very interesting. The last question, what the study found was that religion is very important in the lives of most couples. I can't say all, but most couples. And it has been shown that religion it's linked to a positive atmosphere, and it's linked to couples learning to communicate better. Because when a couple shares faith, they typically share Bible studies, and they share time, going to church. They share time talking about God. And when you add God into the situation, the entire mood changed in the interviews. It was actually a very humbling experience for this little preacher man right here. So the results, the themes, um, this resulted from the horizontalization process, from Mustakis, whereby the researcher takes the significant themes and you drill them down, and then you place them into small categories. Those categories then form my sub themes. And then I put the sub themes in is the term I'm looking for, I don't want to use the word like-minded, in like categories. I'll call it that. In like categories, meaning if it sounded like teamwork, if it sounded like talking or communication, I used those, and they helped form the codes. Those codes were then separated into 2 different categories again, and those categories were 4 categories, and those categories formed these 4 major themes. And those themes were, as you see, collaboration, communication, commitment, and religiosity. Out of all of this, there were 11 sub themes which formed these 4 major themes. So theme 1, collaboration. This was I have to say, I learned a lot with this theme. This was a shocker to me. And it was a shocker because all I hear is finances, sex, communication, things of that nature as a cause for divorce. When in reality, the number one reason these couples here are staying together is their ability to work together. As you can see, the sub themes of teamwork and compromise help form this theme because it was the couple's ability to put their differences aside and focus on one goal at a time. And as they saw that goal knocked out or accomplished, that would inspire them to go on to the next goal. It would inspire them to go to the next goal after that. And what it really did was it brought their marriage closer together because they learned that they could trust each other's decisions. And as long as they were working together towards a common goal, they didn't really pay much issue to the smaller things that attack a marriage. Theme number 2, communication. This basically goes without saying. Communication is one of the most important pieces of a marriage. And as you can see, what I learned was that these two sub themes of open-mindedness and problem solving help form this theme. And the reason is couples cannot communicate if they have a closed mind. If this is direct from the couples, if you go into the conversation with your mind already made up that this is what we're going to do, irregardless of how you feel or what you have to say about it, there's going to be a communication breakdown, and that communication breakdown is going to manifest itself as an argument, which may not get solved because you failed to communicate properly in the first place. The being open-minded yielded itself to being able to help solve problems, meaning while they're open-minded, it's also interwoven with another theme, actually. They are able to talk themselves through it. And while they're talking themselves through it, they can compromise. And I think you will find that in one of the other themes that was already in one. So theme 3, commitment. I really believe that commitment, or shall I say, I really thought commitment was going to be either theme 1 or theme 2. Commitment showed in some variations and forms of the word as a code 140 times in this study. Collaboration was about 180. This was paramount to the success of these couples. And a lot of these couples, as you can see, the 3 sub-themes, the breaking of generational curses, those couples, primarily the husbands, they sought to be better than their fathers were. A lot of the wives, they wanted to show people how it was supposed to be done when you're married because they came from some of them came from broken homes as well. They decided this will not be my end state, and they were committed to making their marriage work, so they did not end up being a statistic. From that, they learned how to be content, believe it or not. And it was shared with me that if you are content with who you have at home, then you will not have the want to roam. Direct quote. It was very interesting because he literally said to me, he said, I'm happy here. There's nothing for me anywhere else. And his contentment spurred his commitment to the marriage. And then the mindset. This was a big one for the wives because one of the interview questions was, the question was, how would you describe the process of becoming a husband, or how would you describe the process of becoming a wife? That question formed this particular sub-theme of mindset, which ultimately formed this major theme of commitment, because they had to completely overhaul the way they were taught and the way they thought in order to make their marriages work and last as long as it has. Theme 4, religiosity. As stated already, religion plays a pivotal role in marriage. These sub themes of God, prayer, faith, and whether or not religion was helpful or not. Um, I had one husband who told me religion was not helpful. He equated it to a relationship with God. But what I learned was the relationship with God helped teach them how to love their wives. It helped teach them how to honor their husbands, but it also helped teach the husbands to be better husbands, better leaders, and better communicators. I- It was interesting because learning to communicate with your spouse and the link between that and communicating with God was profound. It's if I learn how to pray, I can talk to my wife. If I learn how to love God, I can love my wife or I can love my husband because I have to love them, as the Bible says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And even as you love yourself, for no man ever hated his own body. And it basically drove the point home when the husbands quoted that scripture to me and said, if I don't love her, then I don't love myself. And if I don't love myself, I don't love God. So they linked the two together and they formed their own method. I don't know if I want to use the term love language here because it's taken, but they formed their own method of loving their wife. And it was actually quite stunning to watch, actually, because I was taking notes and journaling as I was doing this, and I was watching their interactions with each other. And you could see the genuine love that these husbands and wives had for each other. And it was a sight to behold. It was very encouraging when you look at the statistics of marriage and how they're talking about divorce. So, implications of this study, theoretically speaking, this study really homed in on the family systems theory, and it really, oh, the word I'm looking for, it really proved, if I can use that term, it really proved the theory to be correct. It corroborated this theory. Most of the studies that I used focused around family systems theory stated that the interactions between family kind of really help to set up different facets of society. And as stated, the family systems theory, they use triangles, and the triangle serves as the foundation or the structure for the family. It's the three people, the parents and the kids. And that triangle forms the basis of the family. And there are 8 tentacles of, or 8 subsystems of family systems theory. And each one of them, though they are independent, they are interdependent. They all need each other. One of them being sense of self. And that sense of self says, yes, I am my own person, but I still need my family. Taken into the context of marriage, this basically says that this husband, this wife, these children all affect each other. If one goes down, the others have to come up and take over the spot where the husband or the wife or the child went down. Or if one is not, if one is successful, then we're all successful. Empirically speaking, this was attachment theory that I used as the conceptual framework. Empirically, this study actually, once again, it corroborated and expounded upon some of the other studies that showed that bonding process. This was seen through the journaling and watching the interactions of these couples as they held hands and sat close to each other, because body language speaks volumes when you're talking about marriages. These couples were close, they were laughing, they made a lot of jokes. I had interviews that went for 2.5 hours that I had to stop because they just could not stop talking about each other. And they had grown that bond, that attachment. One of the questions was, how would you describe the bond between you and your spouse. And watching them, they didn't need to describe it because I saw it. I saw attachment theory at work. When one had to leave the room, you could see the slight, is he okay, when he left out of the room to go answer a call, or when is she coming back? You could see it in their face, like, where's my baby at? I need my wife. I need my husband. I can't do this interview without you. The practical implications of this study, as I stated in the beginning, this study will help marriage counselors. It will help pastors. It will help lay members who just want to do something to help marriages. For pastors, it'll help them set up their marriage ministries in their church. This particular study, if they take and they read this actual study and they see what these couples said, this will help create new models for marriage counseling. The limitations and limitations. As you all know, the limitations are those things that I chose, how I chose the participants, and those, in that light. As you can see, all of the couples were African American. That's a choice that I made as the researcher. The marriage length of 20 years or longer, that was another choice that I made. And they all had to be heterosexual couples because they were all Christian couples. I had some limitations. COVID-19 obviously was one, which is why I couldn't do the interviews in person. I had a lack of willing participants. The study originally needed 15 participants, and I was unable to get them. And really, it gave rise to the mentality in the Black family that what happens in this house stays in this house. We don't want anyone in our business, things of that nature. And this study really gave rise to that. And then there were a lack of third-party participants. The study required or asked that the couples provided me one person, a pastor or a counselor or a friend or even a family member who has known them for at least 5 years of their marriage. And really, when I went to contact all of them, none of them returned my calls or my emails. So they also fall under the lack of willing participants category. Recommendations for future research. This study was groundbreaking for me, and I believe anyone who reads it can see its necessity. However, I feel this study can be expounded upon if we use a mixed methods approach. If we throw in numbers of how many couples are African-American couples who are married and are staying married, if we throw in numbers of how many of them believe communication is paramount, how many of them believe collaboration and religion, are paramount to making marriage work. I think we should also add a non-Christian component to the study, meaning let's survey atheists, let's survey the Jewish community, let's survey Buddhists, Hindus. I feel like we will probably get the same result as far as religion goes, but I know everything else will be different, and it'll make the study that much more rich. Additional data collection methods. I was not able to have any archival data. Maybe we could use focus groups and using individual interviews. So what I did, because of the time constraints on the couples, I interviewed them jointly. Originally, Dr. Probst and I talked about doing one interview for the husband, one interview for the wife, and then bringing them together. But their time constraints wouldn't allow for that. So I had to interview them together, and they each heard the questions because I would ask the husband one and I would ask the wife the same question. And I feel like if we could separate them, the answers would probably be richer, and it would probably be vastly different as well. Because I could tell once again by observations, when you ask a certain question, the husband will kind of look at the wife like, now that's too private, or the wife will look at the husband like, we're not going to talk about that. And it would kind of curb the answer just a little bit. So in summary, the study attempted to discover those healthy habits of long-term African-American couples. I found that all of the findings of the study with the 5 research questions were consistent with all of the previous studies that I read, as far as the theories and the conceptual framework goes, as well as the divorce rate and why couples are getting divorced. Those 4 major things again were commitment, communication, religiosity, and collaboration. That's interesting. Why is that there? Okay. These findings are in line with the constructs of family systems theory, and the lack of willing participants led to this smaller sample size, whereby if we can get a larger sample size, I feel like we could really stretch this study. And I would recommend broadening this study as well to include other ethnicities, so that we can get this a complete picture of marriage as a whole. That stated, I would again like to thank you for joining me, and I will turn the floor over to some questions.
Okay. Doctor, do you have any questions to start out?
Sure, yes. All right. So great job, Derrick. It was a really interesting study. You did an excellent job, presenting your findings. It's clear how much you've done, how much work you put into it, how much you've learned. And I just found it really interesting. Such an important study. So one thing that kind of stood out to me, and I'm going to ask you some questions. So I was actually just a reader on a dissertation defense, very similar to yours, but it was couples of blended families. So they both had children from outside of their marriage. And kind of what stood out to me is, and this is my perspective, so I wanted to hear your perspective, because I felt the same way when listening to yours. There are some basic things that are needed to have a successful long-term marriage. And I feel like it applies to, I'm in a traditional Caucasian marriage. It would apply to me, it applies to you, it applies to blended families as well. But blended families and in your study, African-American families have more to overcome to get to those kind of basics that we all need. Would you agree? Do you feel differently? I'd just kind of like to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Actually, having counseled a couple of blended families, I completely agree. Because they have the best and the worst of both worlds, if you think about it. They also have to get over the turmoil in the home, as far as the difference in discipline styles and communication styles with the children. Children, I find that it's harder on the husbands, because you can't take the role of dad. You just cannot, especially if that hurt is there from a father who left the family. You just cannot overcome that. You'll always be Mr. Joe. You know what I mean? Societal-wise, I do believe you're absolutely right. Because for some reason there is a disconnect when you find out that they were raised in a blended family. They look at the world completely different. And I'm trying to figure out myself how. You know what I mean? We should be raising them with the same values, but how are they struggling when it comes to the workplace, when it comes to school? And I found out the answer. The answer is the difference in the parenting styles. That is why they have so much to overcome, because the parents, 9 times out of 10, they're butting heads. Because husband wants the child to come home straight from school, do homework. Wife says, oh, well, no, we have TV time at, right after school. He or she's been in school all day long. They give them some time to wind down. You know what I mean? Husband's like, no, you need to keep your grades up. I need you to go do your homework. So now the parents can't get along. Well, then what does that do? We go back to family systems theory, right? That change in behavior then trickles down to the kids, and now the house is tense and toxic. That's my take on it.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. So let me ask a couple other questions. Did you have any surprises, findings that you weren't expecting, any responses or feedback you weren't expecting?
I had several, but the one that stands out to me is this couple was married 47 years, and the husband used to work a lot.
Mhm.
And it came out during the interview that the wife said, she said, I've never told my husband this, so he's going to hear it the first time as well as you.
Mhm.
He didn't know how much of a strain him being away from the home,
Mm.
out of state, on all of these different, calls and all of these different things. He didn't realize how much that was affecting her and how much she really, thought about second guessing herself. And then she decided to push through. Well, the surprise was she didn't realize that he was having the same issue while he was away.
Interesting.
So he heard it for the first time, and she heard it for the first time, and they both
Interesting.
just kind of looked at each other like,
Wow.
all these years, you never told me. And she said, it wouldn't have done any good. I still had to hunker down and
Mhm.
make it work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's interesting. So that was kind of surprising. What
It
about
really
challenge?
was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I said it really was.
Yes, yes. So you mentioned challenges, and that was kind of my question before you got to the last slide. So one of them was participation, and then also you mentioned kind of like the African American culture. We keep it to the family. We're not going to share with this person. How was there any other challenges, and how do you think you were able to overcome those challenges?
Definitely technology with the older crowd.
Mm-hmm,
We had to do some scheduling with that and
mm-hmm.
make sure they were able to navigate it. And they ended up having their granddaughter. This is the couple that was married like 56 years.
Wow.
They were 70 years old. He's like 77, he doesn't know anything about Zoom. So they ended up, we made it work because the granddaughter was there.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I'm sorry, she was one of their adopted children. They had 9 adopted kids and
Oh, wow.
6 regular kids, 6
Wow.
biological kids. And
Mm-hmm.
the youngest daughter, the last one in the house, was there, and she was able to get them on Zoom so we could do this.
Good, good.
Other than that,
I'm
it was
glad
really
that
just
worked out.
technological. That was all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I've got 2 last questions for you, and then I'll be all done. If you were to create a professional development training for either counselors or pastors, you're working with primarily African American couples, maybe we'll say starting out in their marriage. But if you were to create a training for them, based on what you've learned, what would be some key aspects of your
Interesting you
training?
asking that question because I'm actually already working on it.
Oh, good. Excellent.
That's interesting. Definitely I'm basing it around my 4 major themes.
Okay.
So there will be a lot of, I guess by me being in the Army, I'm used to team building exercises.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be a lot of, I won't call them team building, I'll call them couple building exercises.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember one time, like for instance, the theme of communication. For instance, my wife and I, we went to a Strong Bonds conference that the military puts on for couples, and it's free of charge. It's a whole weekend, fully paid for. But they had this technique in there that I've actually kind of borrowed and used it myself. And the technique is called the floor. So what they do is, and it really helps with your communication, the person speaks for no longer than a minute. You give time for the other person to reflect on what you said, and then they reply with what you said. That's what they can reply to. You can't add anything, you can't take anything away. You must reply to what the person said. So what it is, it's a communication exercise, but it's also a hearing and paying attention exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And we took a little piece of cardboard and we actually wrote the floor on it. So whoever has the cardboard has the floor. The spouse cannot interrupt. It also teaches respect. So I would kind of build off of those foundations. So
Mm-hmm.
I really
Communication.
think Black couples, we struggle with power in marriage.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
So I would really like to implement some trust exercises. And I would really like to say, okay, I'll give you homework. This week, you're not allowed to be the man of the house. You have to take your wife's lead this week.
Mhm.
Next week, she has to take the husband's lead. And then we put them together and we devise a plan going forward of how we lead and how we yield. That's how I would build my program.
Interesting. Very interesting. So that actually leads me to my final question, which is, where do you plan to go from here with your study? So I'm glad to hear, developing some training. Any other plans at this point?
I am actually I recently started my own ministry,
Oh, wow.
and I am going to take this particular construct. I gave it a name already. I'm calling it Rock Solid, Couples That Work. I'm going to take it around, and my plan is to show churches how to build successful marriage ministries, because out of 50 churches, maybe 3 have an actual marriage ministry.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And marriage retreats don't get it. You just have to, there's more to it than just once a year taking a couple on a trip to the Bahamas or something. No,
Well, that's wonderful. So exciting to hear. It's been, I appreciate being a part of your study. When I read about it, I was like, this is such an important topic. Like I told you, I was just on another study with the blended families. And so I really appreciate getting to hear both yours about your study and the other students' study, and getting to be a part of it, and excited to hear and see what you'll do in the future. So keep in touch down the road. Let me know how things are going.
Hopefully I can start teaching at Liberty.
Oh, I'm sure they'd be looking for people. Let me know if you need me to put in a good word.
Couple of questions that I had. I wondered about the stats, if there really was a difference. And statistics, is kind of like, I'm not really sure who came up with this. I think it was Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister of England many years ago, that there are 3 types of lies. There are lies, damn lies, and statistics. So statistics may not be right in that you hear all the time that 50% of American couples divorce, and it's not really true. But the Census Bureau says that it's 42 to 47%. And that doesn't sound right either, because I found the demographic breakdown. It is higher for Black Americans than white America. Black America, 42%, white America down to 38%. Native Americans, 45%. They have the highest. Wow. And it brings up the question of, is trauma a part of this? You talk to people. I have another course at a different place that has a lot of students in the Southwest. A lot of them are Navajo and, and other native nations. And these people going into counseling to combat the alcoholism, the depression that exists there. Do you think there's maybe like a long-term trauma component to the higher divorce rate?
It's funny you should ask me that question, because I was driving in here this morning and I was thinking of the title for a new book called The Trauma of Marriage. If that answers your question, I actually think that there is a traumatic component to marriage. I really do. Because when you think about it, you take 2 people who know, very little to somewhat, about each other. You put them in the same room, and now you expect them to build a life. I have to strip away my single component. I have to strip away everything I knew about life in order to join your life and make our life. I think that is traumatic. That is a major life shift. It really is. So I think there is a trauma component. You know what? I just can't do it anymore. I'm done.
It could be from past life experience, racial oppression, violence, being degraded as a human being, going into the marriage, and then you have all that anger, frustration, somewhat guilt and shame that ride along with you into the marriage. It's got to complicate things. One thing I found
Yes.
in a Princeton study was that avoidance of counseling for Black men it's part of the reason for the higher divorce
Yes.
rate. Giving up, so no more of this. Avoidance is a big issue. If you doing Jessica's defense tomorrow night, Jessica Shine, maybe if you can ask her for a copy of her dissertation. She looked into this, the avoidance
I've
of,
read it.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I've read it.
true. It's fear-based. What's this person going to do to me? Who are they going to share this with? Are they going to the police? Am I going to have problems in this? One interesting aspect I saw during the COVID thing is doing a lot of telehealth. We started getting more clients in our clinics out of the north side of Milwaukee, which is predominantly Black. A lot of them are teenage boys. They don't mind doing telehealth. Neighbor kids aren't going to see them going into a counselor's office.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally private. And they will talk to a point where you got to come off sometimes. I mean, once you get them going, if they don't have to have anything around them that's going to potentially ridicule them, they'll open up. That was really an interesting situation. I wonder if a study in that as to whether or not telehealth would be really advantageous to the Black community. Insurance companies are trying to shut it down now. And I think that's a huge mistake because, transportation is an issue in some, most urban areas, there's transportation issue. There's the neighborhood issue. You don't want to be out at night. You just don't in some areas. And boy, you sure don't want people in the neighborhood knowing you're going to counseling. I mean, that's just not good. Unless you can incorporate it into the churches. And I kind of wonder if there wouldn't be some value in having outside counselors go to churches and do counseling there. So people don't really know they're going to counseling. They're just going to church. Because the pastors don't have the background and they don't have the time. But with school systems, we're finding this works for us. We're in a number of different school systems where our counselors just go in and use a room and nobody's going to counseling. You're just in school, you're talking to this person. And it seems to work pretty well because school counselors have a measly 30 minutes to spend with each student. So that's not too helpful. So that's working. I wonder if a similar model in Black churches would be a good thing. And it's not stepping on the pastor any more than we're stepping on the school counselors. They don't have the background. They don't have the time. So
Right.
There's a lot of potential to fix things here, I think. But that percentage difference between Black and white, it's only 4%. That it's not astronomical, but it might have something to do with the fact that Black men do, go to marriage counseling. That's not the right thing to do. That's between us and not some person listening in.
Yeah.
So I think that stigma of counseling, that fear of counseling has something to do with it. And the avoidance factor of counseling for men, in general, is harmful. But for Black men, I think it seems to be worse than for white men. And it must be really bad for Native American people. So I don't know. What do you think of that? Do you think there's possibilities in researching that farther? Do you think it's has some promise?
Well, in my lit review, I did look at that, and I did see part of the reason for that is, I believe it said trust of the color of the counselor, something along those lines. A lot of Black men, if they go, would prefer to see a Black counselor because of the stigma that all whites are against all Blacks. And they take that into the counseling room. This person can't help me because they don't understand my culture. Basically, it's the mentality of Black men from what I uncovered. I actually noted that the difference in the black women is, a black woman out of her like 70 years, 75-year lifespan, or whatever the case may be, she'll spend maybe 15 to 20 of those years married versus a white woman who will spend 30 years of hers married. What's the difference? Why? A lot of black women want to go see a marriage counselor.
Mhm.
The husbands are preventing them from coming because, like you just said, I don't want them talking to me.
Hmm.
I jumped at the chance. I really did. And it was a white woman. And I tell you what, that woman was good at her job. Hey, it doesn't matter to me. I really think that if we're going to do it in the church, I think we need to separate it from the church. And by that, I mean, if I bring you to church, you're going to think that you're about to get a sermon.
Mm.
If the church sponsors it, and we rent out a convention center, or we rent out a hotel conference room or something like that, and we do breakout sessions, I think that'll make a bigger impact. You just mentioned telehealth. I think telehealth would work for marriage counseling as well. I don't have to go sit on the couch. I can sit on my couch. I just think if we're going to do it in the church, we have to take the church out. I think we need to do it in a different location. And I think pastors need to be aware of that.
That makes sense. The avoidance issue is a real problem. The more people bring trauma into a marriage, and if it's not fixed, then the person with the mental health issue from the trauma is going to be a constant issue, constant problem. It's going to be a real barrier to making it work long term, because regardless of how hard somebody tries, that's always going to peck away at them. And I've noticed that in marriage counseling, one of the partners will have something pretty bad that's happened to them.
Yes.
And you're dealing with somebody walking the line with a personality disorder, or just complex PTSD, and to keep that marriage together is very difficult, because eventually everybody wears out from it.
Yes.
If it's not repaired. So, and if you go back to, it'd be interesting, I don't know how you would do this, but to look at, the whole epigenetics thing, trauma down through the generations, Carl Jung's theory of, archetypes coming down through your DNA. I'm just wondering if the cards aren't stacked heavily, but the black community is overcoming it anyhow, because there's only 4% spread. So you might be doing a lot better than you think, given the circumstance that was handed to you.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
that's why I was wondering, where are they getting these numbers from? Who are they polling? Like, did you just take the couples in Florida, or did you take the couples in California? What did you do? That can't be a nationwide statistic.
No, it's, statistics, are not terribly trustworthy. Sorry, Dr. Volk, but, sometimes.
You're not gonna like that comment.
No. But sometimes it can mislead. And if you look at the circumstance behind the statistics, it tells a different story. And for what I see of this, based on the national stats, there's a lot of hope. Something is being done right. Because given the deck of cards that black people have been handed, doing pretty well. So there's room for improvement, and to demonstrate and lead other groups of people based on what's been accomplished.
That's true. Because the one common trait that many black people have is that we have learned to stick together.
I also did some research to see if cohabitation had something to do with skewing the statistics.
Yes.
As to whether or not more whites are cohabitating, so maybe their divorce rate's down because you never got married in the first place. They're about the same. It's 7% for black people and 8% for white people. It's not significant. So that's not the issue either. So The issue, I think, is for outside sources and upbringing, and then the fear of going for
Yes,
help. The fear of
we
looking.
have about 15, I think it was, between 15 and 22% of the younger generation who say they will never get married.
A lot of people
Those,
say
those,
that.
those, that age group, they don't have healthy models of marriage. They're growing up in single parent homes and they're not seeing, they don't see the benefits of marriage, the double the income kind of a deal. They're not seeing, the fact that 14% of people who have a heart attack, if you're married, the 14% of you that are married, if you have a heart attack, you're a lot likelier to come home earlier and healthier from the hospital than someone who's not married. They don't see the health benefits. You're likely to live longer if you're married as well. They don't see the benefits. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any other questions. I just thought to bring that up as possible areas of future study that you recommend, whether you want to do it or somebody else do it, that would have some benefit.
I think I'm done for a while.
Yeah. So, doctor, do you want to confer, or are you kind of?
I'm good.
I'm ready to pull the trigger. I don't think we need to put you in the box and
any longer.
I'm ready to roll. And what I'll do is I'll put the paperwork through, and Dr. Malasey had some stuff about getting published, and I'll look into that. I think this should be published. And I'll be working on that the next few days. So, Dr. Smith, just take it easy for a few days and we'll get the ball rolling for you. Congratulations.
Yes.
You've done a very good job.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Dr. Smith. Very excited for you. You gonna celebrate this evening or take a long nap?
I'm working this evening.
Working, oh no.
I'm here till 11 tonight.
Oh, wow. Well, hopefully later this week, or you have to do something nice for Valentine's Day for your wife, right?
I do.
So, and hopefully you guys can enjoy a nice celebration soon.
Dr. Staddy, I have a 1-year-old and an 8-year-old.
So it's difficult.
The 1-year-old is in the "that's my mama" phase.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would encourage you to look into teaching too.
Definitely.
And to reach out to Black men that are interested in humanity, that they go into counseling, because, man, we need Black men in the counseling profession. Try to find somebody that does it. No way. Few Black women, no Black men. Can't find them.
They're being shied away from the field.
Yeah.
You can't even find Black male teachers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shortage, nationwide shortage of Black male teachers, especially in K through 12.
And why is that? Is it because they know the income's not that great?
That's exactly the reason right there. They don't pay enough.
But the thing is, in counseling, if somebody goes into private practice and sees 25 people a week, in some markets, people are pulling down $150, $200 a session. In a market like I'm in, which is kind of, I don't know, the insurance companies are kind of tough. We make like 70, 80 a session here. But even if you do that, if you see 20, 25 people a week, you can make pretty good income if you're working for a clinic that gives you an honest split on the money. So we have counselors in our group making 80, 90,000 a year. Now they're working pretty hard, but they're doing that. So you
also, like you said, adjuncting on the side is a great, side gig.
Yeah. If I can get in there, I'm sure I'm going to try.
Yeah.
I really am.
I'm an instructional mentor, and Dr. Rice is my chair. We work together a lot, so I'd be happy to, put in a good word. If you want to send me an email, I can, like a professional email of your interest, I can forward it on to him.
You'll have it this afternoon.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate your work and your effort, and
yes,
your enthusiasm for making things better for people. I really do. So,
Such a meaningful study, really is. Really, really is.
I thank the both of you for your time.
hey,
I know I was a bit bullheaded at times.
you kind of have to be to get through these.
Yeah.
No, that's not unusual. So
It all worked out very well. So great job. You did a ton of work here. Excellent job.
all right.
Well, sorry that you have to work till 11, but hopefully you can, enjoy some downtime later this week.
I'm the chief. I'll probably leave about 8.
There we go.
Maybe sooner since I've been here since 9.
Yes, that's a long day. Especially it's like an emotional draining day.
Yeah.
So, all righty. Well, thank you both. Let me know if you need anything, but nice working with you both and congratulations again.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.